Hit the lights!
You've discovered the Halfwatt podcast. We want to educate and entertain by tapping into the most trusted source of new technology, the ones installing and innovating it. You, the tradespeople that build from the ground up. Join us as we talk with industry leaders, veteran contractors, and even some young blood.
Welcome aboard. Today in the studio, I have the pleasure of meeting and talking with Sue Corbett-Furgal. Welcome.
Thank you. This is really fun.
It's you've got a really, really cool background. So we're gonna have an excellent time talking today. So tell us about yourself, a little bit about yourself. Who are you working for now, and so that they all know you're legit.
I'm legit. I work for George Fox University in Newburgh, and I've worked part-time for them for about 25 years.
Wow.
Started way back. Like we were just talking about, when I got into the electrical business in Oregon, you had to start over, get the license. I got the old 4-year license.
The JLE.
The JLE.
Did you hit all the endorsements on your JLE when you?
We had to go back. Both my husband's a supervising electrician.
Oh,
I chose to go into low voltage for reasons that you'll find out. So we had to go back and find all the people we worked for in California, all the head electricians of the companies and the different things, and have them all verify all the hours and the different trade positions we had. So it was really laborious. I think we made 2 trips back. This was over, it's 30 years ago.
So I did not have to do that for my JLE. Because I came out of the military, they said, give me your DD 214.
Really?
Yeah. Check off what you can do, honestly. And so I went, well, I can do these. So I checked off the ones I was familiar with, the 5 I was familiar with. And that was, I didn't do the other ones. And then when we went to LEA, they're like, oh yeah, you have to go sit in the class.
Oh, they made you go in class. No, it was a big production, because on top of the college degree and all the science and the physics, I still had to go back and take regular electrical training. And so it was very
Even though you'd
painful.
work for so you work for George Fox now. And
right.
and there's a lot of security and access
Fire.
control and
I
fire.
do a lot of fire, mostly.
What kind of fire systems are you putting in?
Well, when we got there, I went to work a year after my husband did. We both started there's a company in McMinnville that has a security company that we started, and we worked on that for 3 years. And then he went to George Fox as a supervising electrician and found that all their fire systems were 1962 Siemens.
Oh, no kidding.
They were all in disrepair.
So can you say the company that you started?
We started D&D Security.
Oh, you started D&D.
Yeah.
Okay. No
we
kidding.
Worked for it. Yeah, and
Nice.
It was good for them because I had gone back to school and taken a year of DOS to be able to set up everything digitally.
Big timer.
Big time.
Big timer with the DOS. Look at you.
Yeah, but it's basically under everything, so it really came in handy. So we worked, and we started all new accounts, all new equipment. I think we started with a Demco, and we used, I think we used Central Station out in Estacada. This was way back.
Yeah,
they were
CSM.
starting.
Yeah.
And it was successful, and then so I did sales and installation for a while, and then I just switched over to installation because I had little kids, and I worked part-time for quite a while. So George Fox needed a supervising electrician, and they hired my husband, and then about a year later, he said the fire systems are a mess. Well, I had been learning fire and studying it, so I designed a system for them for one of their big dorms. And it went through inspection with no changes. I went exactly by the book, NFPA. Oh, yeah. It was
Whipped out 72 and said, this is how it's going to be.
And I laid it all out and put it on a blueprint, and they hired me at that point. So I was really fortunate over the years. Well, back in the good days, there was a lot of classes available. The manufacturers, just different entities had really good classes, hands-on. And the school pretty much was willing to send me to any class there was. I went to Seattle. I went to California. So
they gave you like manufacturer's training?
I had silent night training. That was really good. I had, there was all different ones, basic programming, design, eventually going for NICET. And I got up to NICET too, but the school didn't care and Newburgh didn't care really. So I kind of let it go and just continued to do everything. But, that's old school. I mean, you had to learn how to not only design, but you had to learn to install and to troubleshoot. And then document everything. And test and all that.
So you were doing all that?
Everything.
And so you basically left D&D and went over and
started another company for them, basically.
Yeah, essentially.
Because they weren't monitored. They I think one or two were monitored, but we started over with all brand new equipment and switched them all over to CSM.
Nice.
And then managing that, setting up their database. I've always managed their database, which we started also for D&D. So they got off the ground with a clean slate, basically, which was really nice.
That's excellent.
For them. So it's been quite the adventure. Over time, my previous experience and my college experience and that kind of thing came in handy because I got spread a lot thinner. I ended up managing all the elevator service and rebuilds and remodels.
So you oversaw all that work as well. So you oversaw the elevator contractors and then worked with the state inspectors to make sure that the elevators were compliant. There's a lot to that. That's a lot of work. That is a lot of work.
The biggest problem with George Fox is if they find out you can do it, you get to do it.
That's your job.
And I was part-time for years because I had kids and, would take a few days off at least, and then come back and just drag the baby in with me. It was very old school. I laugh now.
Help mommy pull wire. Here you go. Roll that down the hall.
Go sleep. I mean, until they started moving around, then I couldn't. But it was just part of our life in a lot of ways. So it's been a real adventure. And then things changed dramatically with COVID. The school had to downsize considerably, and we had a new financial officer who was looking for ways to kind of stop some leaks in the boat, and that's pretty typical in academia. So we went from 6 people in the electrical department down to just Paul and I. So between the two of us, because of his supervisor's license and my extensive programming experience, we could do anything they wanted.
No kidding.
Because I also programmed lighting controllers and that kind of thing. But it's been really interesting.
So if it's a PLC, you've got your hands on it.
I took an entire week of PLCs, and I will not program.
That's not your cup of tea.
No.
Well, lighting controllers are PLC to some measure.
Yeah, they are, but the software's more intuitive. It's more
is it really?
It is. The modern lighting controllers, or else they're handheld where you talk to them individually. But the big programs.
So let's back up. So you can program the unit that controls all the lights, and then there's individual programmers that go out to program individual lights. How does that?
Nlight is one of them. It's kind of like the idea of a addressable fire system almost.
Okay.
Where each light has an address, and I haven't gotten.
They're all networked.
They're all networked together.
And they're LEDs.
They're LEDs. Some of them are dimmable. Some are different colors. They're programmable. I don't do a lot of that. Because I only have so many hours in my life, but they would have me probably do that as well. Wow. But it's been really, my biggest problem is I get bored. So obviously that's not happened. I've been able to expand into different areas. And then the school decided that they weren't going to hire people right now. They were going to outsource. Well, in our own company years ago, I'd had experience writing contracts, and I wrote the contracts for D&D. So I took on contracting and speccing out the electrical jobs now. And it took a little while to get back up to speed with regular electrical, but that's been kind of fun, and I've enjoyed working with them.
You really do have your hands on a lot of different things.
A lot of different pies. But being flexible, too, I think helped. I have a part-time position, which has been really good for me with a family. I work anywhere from minimum of 20 hours up to as many hours as I want or need. And so the flexibility has been very, very important. And you don't get that with all jobs.
No, yeah, you don't.
And when there's a big project and it has to be done, I'm there.
Yeah.
But other times it's pretty much, as needed.
And Paul still works there?
We both still work there.
You both still work there.
He's been full-time.
And as the supervising electrician, he's carrying the electrical load for
He's
everything.
got the bulk of
he's
it.
got the whole thing. And he's a high voltage?
Yeah, he's got a regular journeyman, and then he got his supervisor's license, 25 years ago, I think. It's been a long time.
I guess I answered my own question with that, but yeah.
I know. But
makes sense.
But we, and we did, obviously, specialize to some degree, but he also is very knowledgeable with fire, but he never liked the programming as much, so I kind of got more into that.
Huh.
And it worked out. Not everybody likes programming. I know a lot of LEAs that don't like programming. They really don't like it. They'd rather
I've met a
install.
lot that don't like it too. And I've met others that's all they want to do.
Exactly.
Like they just get stuck in that groove.
Right.
And I do a lot of programming myself. So
Do
there's
you?
times, when I sit down, there's times when I can sit down and program for 6 hours, 7 hours and go, I hope that's it. Like really, honest to God, I got to drop this thing.
Yeah.
I got to get moving because I got to go out in the field and do stuff. I can hear troubles piling up because we have such a vast system that
you're not
you
out
look up
there.
one day and there's 6 troubles that weren't there before, and someone's got to fix them. And it's either me or my apprentice. So.
Well, see, you're unusual because I notice it seems with the newer LEAs, especially, they're either installers or they're programmers or they're designing. You don't do them all.
No, I know.
And that's true in HVAC. It seems to be true in elevator. A lot of your techie occupations, people that can integrate are harder to find.
Very, very hard to find. And when I teach, I talk about that because of the... First, I try to get a student to look at how similar things are. Because if you can program a fire alarm system, you can program a security system, you can probably program an access control system. Right. You might be able to work on lighting. I want my students to understand that a lot of these systems have similar properties. You just have to recalibrate your head, and don't be afraid of the, like if look at you. You got tossed into lighting. You didn't cower in a corner and go, I can't do this. You embraced it and did it.
And if it doesn't come out right, you go back and learn what you did wrong. A lot of times it's just a function of how many hours.
Let me try that again.
Why are they all off or on or blinking?
Well, you have a really unique background. So you and I both came from California.
Yep.
We're transplants up here. You were. So tell us a little bit about your background. You got a degree in geology. Where'd you get that from?
I went to Cal State Northridge, and then I spent a year up in Arcata and Humboldt State.
So kids, Northridge is about as far north in LA as you could get, right before you go up to Magic Mountain.
Yeah, it's pretty much kind of the center.
Kind of it's
a little bit of the center of the valley. But I'd grown up hiking, and I was in the outdoors and all that, and I liked hands-on stuff. But I just assumed I'd become a geologist. Well, I got a job in a laboratory, a big laboratory, and they were taking college students basically that had science degrees, and then they teach you vibration testing. We tested rocket engines, airplane parts.
So did you have a vibrator, like the big shaker? Yeah. My grandfather did that for Teledyne Ryan at Lindbergh Field. So he shook parts for the Apollo, Lunar landers, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, you had everything from super high frequency like jet engines, and then they built an earthquake simulator, and you could program. I mean, you can't really predict an earthquake, but it was as close as they could get. And then we would test parts for nuclear reactors and simulate a meltdown, essentially, with radiation and boiling water and vibration and extremely high voltage as they would get ripped apart from the bulkhead. So it was pretty exciting.
That would be a cool lab to see.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
It was also extremely dangerous, and they weren't always real careful about stuff. So anyway, we worked there, and I worked with my husband after we weren't willing to change some paperwork for him, and they gave us a choice of explosives or high voltage. So we said, oh, yeah, we'll take the high voltage. Some of that was very scary. I was sent to witness some tests on the parts that we had, and it was literally like a Frankenstein movie. You'd see an arc through dry air that was 15 feet long from these things when they ripped out.
How much voltage were you working with?
Probably 50, 60,000 volts. I honestly don't remember. at the time, my experience with electricity was largely theoretical. It was from physics. So I understood electromagnetic fields and that kind of thing, but I didn't have a real practical handle on the parts themselves.
Well, and see, when you, and especially if you work in any nuclear physics where you're talking about million electron volts, you know, the energy that's contained in an atom, and you start breaking them apart, neutrons and all that stuff. That's, you know, a quantitative number. That, what does that really look like
in the real world?
In the real world,
you can't see it.
And you can't see it. You know what its effects are. You can measure it with, you know, gamma ray and neutrons, how in a neutron flow and stuff like that. But you don't really get a chance to see it. Now you're working in a field where you can see it, and you can actually see the electromagnetic side of the house.
That's true. And of course, there you could, and if you're on the power distribution end, which is actually on the outside of the reactor, that's where your wires rip out of your bulkhead, and you see the arc that occurs from the separation. The radiation you would see only in the damage it did. You would see parts burned. And they had us one time go to a lab. Oh, they sent my husband to the lab that day. And he said, yeah, the scientists up there told me, don't stand there, there's a little leak. I went to the front office. I demanded my boss. I said, you send one of these old guys that already had kids.
Yeah, no kidding.
Send my husband on a little leak of radiation.
Yeah.
It was just stuff like that all the time. One of the guys got severely shocked. He stuck both hands into the backside of a 400-volt DC transformer. And I heard him, he was in the same room, and he comes out, and he's like doing a duck walk. He's all squatted down on one, couldn't stand up. Well, they just sent him home. And then, you know, turned out he was okay. I was amazed he didn't get severe burns.
Wow.
But there was stuff like that would happen. So anyway, meanwhile, we decided we wanted a company of our own. What could we do? Well, Paul had a degree in some kind of industrial electronics thing. He had a 4-year degree. So I liked electrical. I went back to school for that. And we ended up getting, in California, the license requirements were a little different back then. And they had a C10 that was like a regular license. And it was kind of all mixed together. I mean, this was over 30 years ago. So I forget exactly. We got the license and started installing alarms. And we did that part-time and still worked at the lab. Well, I got injured. I was witnessing a test, and the guy that was working for me was on drugs. And that was very common in the 80s. A lot of people used cocaine, and there was no drug testing. Well, whatever he was using, he opened the wrong valve, and the test setup exploded, and I got a piece of shrapnel in me. So there was all this chaos, and we found out that they had basically cooperated with OSHA, and they had agreements, and they weren't going to fix anything. There was just a lot of stuff like that, which was pretty typical in the 80s, I think, in general. So we continued to do the alarms out in Apple Valley. That's where we wanted to move. We wanted to get out of the valley. The air was so bad, and I was starting to have some lung problems. So I was doing home shows.
And they were actually cleaning it up by the 80s. Remember what it was like in the 70s?
Oh, yeah. You couldn't see across the street.
Oh, my God.
It was, and
we just drive from Temecula and go into Riverside, and it was just like,
oh, that was bad.
It was terrible.
Your eyes would water, and your lungs would hurt.
Your lungs would hurt.
And both of my parents smoked, so I already was at a disadvantage.
I remember those times going, I remember everybody smoking.
Everybody smoked. I'm like, you guys out of your mind?
Nobody had seatbelts in their cars.
That way when you got burned, you could jump out of your seat, you know. It was a very bizarre time.
It was a very bizarre time.
A lot of things. People... So, you know, like the whole safety thing, it just wasn't as emphasized as it is now, I guess. And I got a back injury, laid me on, but I didn't file because as a woman, you didn't file. There's no way you're going to file if you can help it. So anyway, time went on, and they decided they wanted to keep us. Well, they were building a new laboratory in Virginia, and it's there, it's beautiful. And they said, we'll move you both, and it's yours.
Wow.
Ground floor opportunity, staggering amount of money. But we decided, no, we were going to be stupid and we were going to go out on our own. Anyway, long story, we ended up bringing in enough business to quit the laboratory and go start the alarm company out in Apple Valley. And there was a burgeoning drug trade, so we started doing well, and we specialized primarily in new construction. I hate fiberglass with a passion, and so since I was the one primarily doing the sales and speccing, I said, well, we had 15 contractors that just would call us up and order a package on the homes. So it was really good. Well, we started getting bigger and bigger homes, multi-million-dollar homes at the time. And this was before you had cell phones, you'd go out. Oh, yeah. This is the desert, right? I'd be on my way to Barstow and the pager would go off. And it's like, oh my gosh, should I find a phone? Is it important?
Right.
Secretary was pretty good, but I thought, well, what if it is important? Anyway, I find a phone and she says, the FBI's here. You need to come back. Well, at the time, there was a company called FBI that made security systems.
Yeah, I remember the FBI.
So I said, what do you mean? Is it the sales rep? And she says, no, it's the FBI. And he's sitting on your desk. You need to come back.
The real FBI.
The real guy.
The real ones.
So I turn around, I drive 20 miles back. And I go in my office, and he's sitting there with his feet on my desk.
Nice.
And he says, hi, my name's John White. I'm from the FBI. And we were really straight. I was super careful with accounting and all that. And I thought, why is the FBI here? He says, you know all those really expensive homes you've been doing? I said, yeah. He says, do you ever look at the checks they pay you with? I said, oh, no, they pay us all in cash. And then I'm thinking, how stupid am I? So I ran over to the safe and opened the safe, and we had a big pile of cash in there. I said, see, it's all here. I'm going to declare it, because I thought it was something to do with taxes. He says, well, why are you protecting them all? I said, what are you talking about? They buy massive security systems, they pay us well, and we put them in.
Yeah.
He says, well, they're all selling franchises to manufacture methamphetamines. Oh. They weren't users. I mean, you could tell.
No kidding.
And he says, you're either going to cooperate with us or we're going to yank your alarm license.
Sure.
So that was nasty. Well, anyway, 2 of them turned state's evidence on the other one, ends up in jail. And I get a phone call from the lady in jail, and she says, you're dead. You bugged our house.
Oh, my gosh.
And we had no idea what was going on, right? So I noticed we lived out way up in the sticks. Our house was up in the sticks. We had an office in town.
And you don't realize this either.
I had no idea.
You don't think about it.
No, we were just...
Because someone's paying with cash, you don't care.
We didn't know. They paid cash. And then he says... But I did think about it. One of the women, they had video businesses, and they'd hand the drugs out in the cases. And I looked at her. She says, do you know anything about profit and loss statements? And I said, well, a little bit. I looked at it. She made like $100 that month. And I'm going, wonder why she lives in a multi-million-dollar house, right? Then I really sounded stupid.
So they're laundering it all through the...
They're laundering it through the video stores.
The video stores, yeah.
Well, the lady called from prison and said, you bugged our house. You're dead. We decided it was time to get out. We had a very small child. I think she wasn't even 6 months old. We sold the house over the weekend for cash and moved
oh my gosh.
300 miles north
yeah, good call.
To Mammoth Lakes. And we got out of the security business for 3 years, 4 years, whatever it was. We bought an auto parts store. We sold our business to Protection One. And they back then, you could do really well. It wasn't like now where you put the systems in for virtually nothing. We'd get a good price for putting them in. We made money. We had 12 employees, and we sold it to Protection One, sold our house, and got out. Wow. So we bought an auto parts store in Mammoth Lakes that turned out to be, it was all, the books were all cooked. It was all fake. We lost everything that we'd made from Protection One.
Oh, my gosh.
And at the time, Oregon, there was no real work in California. It was a real dead zone.
This would be the late 80s?
This was late 80s. Yeah. And my husband was driving 300 miles back down to Fort Irwin to do work for a contractor down there in underground labs and that whole thing, which is a different story. But anyway, we ended up, Oregon needed electricians, and they were kind of inviting people to come for construction. So we moved to Oregon and started over. So that was when we had to make all the trips back down to the lab and all these places we'd worked to accumulate all the signatures, because they were really hardcore.
To verify that you had the background.
Right, all the hours, how many hours you had. And so, and then I still had to go back to school here. So finally, we both got licensed, and that's when D&D, D&D hired him on, and then he got licensed and I think he paid him more than $10 an hour after that, but it was pretty rough in the beginning.
Wow.
So I ended up going to work for D&D originally to do sales, to build the company up. And then when I got my limited energy license here, I went to work for him. Huh. So yeah, it's been very, very interesting.
Yeah, you have had a very interesting.
But all that experience, like now with George Fox, when things got a lot more complicated and we're deciding, the contracts are a lot bigger and you're dealing with a lot of money, they've basically left us alone to run the electrical department pretty much the way we used to in our own business. I do a lot more of the interfacing with the customers, so to speak, the contractors, and then he's free to stay hands-on. We did hire an LME finally, so has a little bit of help. But the fire systems, we still do all that.
And you do the inspections too and all that?
We're getting to the point where we're trying to get them tested, outsourced. But outsourcing's not a free lunch because...
No, it's a pain.
It's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time, and you put a lot of trust.
Right.
And I did a lot of that work too, and I managed a lot of it for a while. And and you can hire phenomenal inspectors. You can hire people you think are phenomenal, and then you look at the reports and you're like, okay,
Yeah, it looks good, but
what the hell did you do?
I know.
And so it really does run the gambit. And that's and when you're testing a safety system, life safety system, and it's you put your name to it.
Right, you do.
You are liable for that.
You are. Your name is on it, and
Your name's on it.
I still have the 24-hour phone for electrical and fire and all that kind of stuff, and take it seriously, and particularly if you have a dormitory with 100 students in there.
That's a huge thing.
You're taking care of someone else's most precious item here, and I'm really, I get to the point though. It's interesting. They don't. I think kids used to know how to cook better because it seems like we have more frying panini under the smoke detectors and things like that.
Things that aren't making sense.
Evacuate the whole building. And that gets a little old, but it's a serious thing. And I also, now I manage the maintenance on the inverters, the backup generators. This, it kind of expanded with the mechanical knowledge. So that part's been interesting. I've enjoyed that. But it's just too many areas. So it's hard to get it all done.
And it's a far cry from geology, which is what you originally I want to go rock hounding kind of thing. And
well, I was going to be a paleontologist. I wanted to
you were going to go straight to the dinosaur.
I wanted to look for oil.
So really?
Yeah, I wanted to be a rich petroleum geologist. That was my intent.
Okay.
So in Northridge at the time, everybody was competing for that job with Shell Oil or whatever it was.
And people don't know LA is sitting on a bed of oil. There's oil all over LA.
But a big piece of what you do is you end up consulting. And I did some soil, and I worked for an engineering company for a short time after I left the lab. And I did drainage studies and all that kind of stuff on the maps. But you realize you tell people this is not a good place to build, or it's a floodplain or a fire hazard, and they build anyway.
Right.
And it began to look like you're going to spend a lot of time in court defending your decisions, which didn't enthuse me.
Or you tell them that, and then their insurance, when they go to get it insured.
Yeah.
You buy this house, you're on a floodplain, now you have to have flood insurance, which your deductible is high.
Huge.
Your costs are high.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, well, what do you mean?
Well,
this
look
is
at where
desert,
you are.
And when it gets wet, it floods. I mean, that's the way it works.
Yeah, they can't believe it.
Look, living in California, and most of my time was spent in San Diego, up, anywhere from Chula Vista, El Cajon, North County.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so, that's a whole different world.
Oh, it is.
People don't realize just what a desert's like when you put 1 million people in it. It's not fun.
No, it's not. And the water has to go somewhere. And the fire paths, you can see scars. The fire paths go through based on the winds. Yep. And it doesn't really matter if you built a multi-million-dollar housing tract. It's still going to go through. No. And I saw a lot of that when I lived at home. We lived in the north part of the San Fernando Valley. So you always had the ring of fire every fall when the Santa Ana winds.
Yeah. The Santa Anas were
brutal.
Brutal.
80-mile-an-hour winds.
So for folks who have never experienced that, it could be the middle of December, it could be Christmas time. I remember having Christmas time, and the Santa Ana winds will flip, and what will happen is the winds come from the desert up over the mountain ranges and into the valleys towards the ocean. If you live right on the beach, if you live within 5 or 10 miles of the beach, it's livable. The Santa Anas will still dry you out, but then when those things kind of die down a little bit, the marine layer comes in, keeps everything kind of cool. But if you live, and I lived in El Cajon, that's a desert, that's a bowl.
It's a bowl.
That's really what it means, the coffin. And you live out there, and it's just, it was brutally hot. So Christmas Day, it's 72. There's static electricity in everything you touch. Right. There's 10% humidity. Everybody's out riding their bikes.
Your hair standing on end.
And then you're watching TV where it's snowing. Yeah. And it's not snow. It's never snowed in these places. You're like, this is crazy. Yeah. And then it will turn around and flip. And when the fires start. And I never realized as a kid, they had a fire called the Cuyamaca Fire that was outside of the...
I remember that.
It was huge.
I used to hike in Cuyamaca.
Did you?
Yeah, years ago with my friends.
It's a beautiful area.
Very kind of dry pine, high, very nice.
When all that stuff burned, and then I remember as a kid going, every year we would have these big fires, and it would be the you'd see it on the ridge lines, and we never evacuated any of that stuff like we do up here because we have so much more fuel.
Right.
But then this would have been back in the early 2000s. About mid-2000s, my oldest daughter went down to visit somebody who lived in Crest. And Crest is just to the east of El Cajon and up in the hills. Okay. And I drove through the town. I lived in El Cajon for a long time, but never really went to the outskirts. I saw this place, went, this is really pretty. And then the next year when I went back through, it looked like a bomb had gone off. Every single house had burned down. And it was the first time I had seen that level of destruction where I'd actually driven through it, other than Katrina. I had some family that lives in New Orleans, not New Orleans, in Baton Rouge. And I went down to visit them after Katrina, and they said, you got to come see the aftermath of Katrina. And I said, no, I don't need to see the aftermath of Katrina. I've been in the third world. I don't need to go down and look at that. No, come on. So we drove down there, and almost every house was vacant. Wow. I saw a shrimping boat in the middle of an intersection. I mean, literally picked up and dropped. It was not a small boat. This is an 80-foot boat.
Oh, wow. Heavy.
No, everything's still on the boat. Tools, radars, everything. Everything was still on the boat. I mean, swimming pools lift up out of people's backyards and go into
pictures.
Staggering. We drove into a parking lot of it had to be a office supply store that was down there, like an Office Max or something. You could see where people gone in and out through the doors. Everything was muddy, and up to where the level of the flood was obviously destroyed. Above that, everything was still sitting on the shelf, completely untouched.
From
completely
water.
Untouched.
Oh my gosh.
Copiers, machinery, all the stuff that never paper, all the stuff which is that's there. So that where the damage was done here, everything above it, nobody had even gone in. No one had taken anything. There was no looting. There was no nothing in this particular area. This is St. Bernard Parish, and the sheriff drove up while we were down there, and my parents could talk the talk better than I could, and they goes, "Oh, you got to go see the shrimping boat. Go down over here, make a left. Go down over here. You can't miss it." So we did. I mean, so I saw some of that destruction, and then same thing when I saw Crest. I was just like, "This is unbelievable."
Yeah, you can't fathom that kind of annihilation. It's very hard. Well, when I was a teenager, we lived right near the epicenter of the Selma earthquake, and our house was cracked in half, and everything dumped, the fridge, the freezer, the shelves, the crystal, all onto the floor. And like you were saying, it was probably about 85. We were having a Santa Ana event. We had to leave. We were evacuated for 3 days because they said the Van Orman Dam was going to break. Well, when we came back, it had been 3 days of, 85 degrees, and you had meat and alcohol and everything all mixed together. It was just disgusting. It was horrific. Yeah. But it was amazing to me because we didn't know our neighbors. We lived in a fairly nice neighborhood. You never talked to your neighbors, and all of a sudden people were coming out of their houses it kind of brought people together, but just not at all acknowledging the fact that they lived in an earthquake area. And I find it kind of interesting here because I've been involved because of fire systems. Then I've been involved more in a lot of the emergency processes and different things and generator backup. And a lot of people that live in Oregon their whole life, it's like, well, this is Oregon. We don't have any disasters. And at the school.
But they sure do. Yeah.
They do.
They absolutely do.
They're not, it's beyond comprehension. Yeah. But I think the fires, particularly the ones like in Santiam Canyon, and, I think it's getting a little closer to home.
It's scary. It is absolutely. I'm so glad that this year, we didn't really have it here in Oregon. We did had a big one up in Washougal, but it was really scary. My wife actually hauled horses and animals out of the fire that they had the not last year but the year before. The
canyon
the
gates.
Real big ones.
Yeah,
all that stuff because she would go in. I had no idea how dauntless she was running into some of these places. She'd send me a video like, well, there's the fire and I got to go pick up all these mules and
save the animals.
Yeah, I had no idea. She's absolutely just fearless to go in there and do those things. So,
that's incredible. Yeah. And that's what I think to some extent it does pull people together. I know my two daughters went down to the fairgrounds to volunteer to help with. We have horses, so
I have horses
they went down. Oh, there you go.
How many horses do you have?
Just two. They're old. One of them's a fjord, and the other one's a little runt pony.
Oh wow!
And then we had draft horses. We had percherons, but we had to move them to a barn because they're too big for our area.
I've got a Belgian draft. She's a Warm Springs Mustang, so she's a mix of Belgian draft, a little bit of Percheron, and
very nice.
Another draft, which eludes me at the moment. She's not tall. She's just she's short, stocky. I love the horse.
Oh, yeah. They have such sweet temperaments.
I love them.
Yeah. I loved the Percherons, but they are 2,000 pounds. These guys are huge.
The real Percherons.
Yeah,
she's got some in it. We had her genetically tested, so we know what. But it's Heinz 57 that comes off the res. You never know. They're completely intermixed.
Yeah, you don't know.
You have no idea. She's absolutely. And we got to ride on the res. So they invited us up because we all have these babies that we got from the res. So they invited us up, and 8 or 9 of us rode on the res.
Oh, that's
we
nice.
had to be the first folks to really ride on the res in years. It was absolutely one of the highlights of my life to be able to ride on the Warm Springs res with tribal permission from the elders. And it was just we did an 8-mile trip, and I was just absolutely beaming from ear to ear the whole. And then we got done. They gave us soup and fry bread, which was just like the top of the mark. I've never been treated so well like that. It was just fabulous. So
well, they do take beautiful care of their forest. I drove over Mount Hood all the time because I have a handicapped son that lives out in Antelope. So I've always appreciated it. They do a good job.
I like them. They're good folk. They really are.
They seem to be very hardworking because it's very manicured.
Yeah, they work hard at it.
Yeah,
so we've had like. With all of the horses and all of the stuff in the fairgrounds, do you live in Yamhill in that area?
We live in Yamhill. We're just a little bit north of town, and we have a 3-acre property. So we had the 3 girls that really, I don't know, I had always wanted horses. I always rode as a kid in California. So we got these draft horses as babies, and then they participated in training in them, and yeah, it was quite the adventure. But no spare cash left over there. So.
No, horses will eat. Yeah, I have 4 horses, and they'll eat you out of house and home.
Yeah.
But we knew that the market was going to drop out. So the last one we had was a BLM Mustang, and we trained her.
Okay.
My wife trained her. I just kind of helped, and we kept her because I thought, no, this horse isn't. She's not spectacular. She's not. She's not a bad horse, and I knew that there were people who could take her after auction, and but I knew if I kept her, I have enough money to make sure that she's going to have a good life,
to take care of her.
And sure enough, the horse market just dropped. It just completely fell apart. So the last auction they had was, people were just going, oh my God, you can't give these things away now because there's less and less people into horses, and now you get people who have more horses than they have money, and then that opens up a whole nother can of worms. Right. So
I
said I've got the space and the money and the time. I'll keep her.
Keep them.
And we'll raise her up and either ride her or find a good home for her, one of the two.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I know ours are old, and it's like, well, what are you going to do? We'll keep them. And so it's a long commitment, the horse thing. And a lot of kids, they really get into it, and then they get into college or whatever, and they lose interest. So our youngest, who she also worked at Fox, she was going to go in the electrical program, and she's kind of not sure. She takes care of the horses and raises some chickens and some other things. So for now.
So how many kids do you have? You have 3 kids?
We have 4 that were natural born, and then we adopted 2.
Oh, cool.
And so the one girl we got actually from Russia, she's great. She works out at the same ranch where my handicapped son lives. So they're kind of together. In Antelope, the Young Life Ranch. It's down in the canyon where the Rajneesh deal was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and they've
absolutely
transformed that. It's beautiful lawns.
Matter of fact, there was a woman who did podcasting for Sarah Dillon when Rick Emerson had his podcast, and Sarah Dillon broke off, and I think a person that was associated with him went to that ranch to run it. There was a personality in some of the original podcasting that happened here in Portland that went, she was born again Christian, and she went over there and helped run that place. So yeah, it's
amazing.
It's always 6 degrees of separation from everything, isn't it?
Small world.
It's a very small world.
Yeah, it's a very small world.
Watch the toes you step on, folks, because there's. Oh yeah. So you've got you've got geology, living in California, running a couple of companies. Talk about companies and running companies. What's that? Because there's a lot of guys I know, a lot of folks I know, women and men, that go, I would like to run my own company.
Oh yeah.
Is it all that it's cracked up to be?
I think the biggest problem I've met a lot of people that wanted to run their own company. And if you don't have passion, you've got to have passion for what you're doing, regardless of what it is. It doesn't really matter. Sell vacuum cleaners, do geologic surveys, it doesn't matter what it is. And if you don't have that passion, you probably are not going to make it because it's hard. It's very hard. It's really, well, I'll give you an example. Like when we went to work for D&D, we'd kind of been through the ringer, and I'd had a couple kids, and so sales is really, really trying to meet the customer's need. If you're good, you want to find out what keeps them up at night. What do they really need, and of course, what can they afford? And there's a lot of I think a lot of satisfaction in that, and that will build your company because they trust you and you're giving them a good product. But that's usually off hours. It's at night. It's maybe on Saturdays. So I ended up saying, I know I'm going to make way less money as an installer, but I just can't do it. I've got a bunch of little kids. Well, when we built our company, I didn't have children at the time, and it was just the 2 of us. We didn't have a huge mortgage. We had saved and paid for a 1-room cabin on 5 acres in the desert, and so we were able to do it without the huge financial pressure that people have now. We did not have debt. We started out with 1 truck and the 2 of us. Yeah. And then I got an office manager because I was going crazy. And then we started hiring employees, and we got to the point where we had 3 crews, 2 crews, a service manager, a salesman, a couple people office, and then my husband and I did most of the troubleshooting, and I still did sales. I had another one that did sales too. I did the more complex stuff as I moved on. But it didn't start that way. It was a lot of work. I mean, we were out in the desert sometimes till 11, 12 at night wiring a new house because it was going to get insulated the next day.
We have no choice.
We have no choice.
Yep.
Physically, it's been really interesting for me. Kept me in pretty good shape for many years, climbing in the ladders and all that. On the other hand, I've also fallen off ladders and fallen downstairs and ruptured discs. And, and you're going to do that whether you're in alarms or electrical or, any kind of physical occupation. And you're probably not going to go take 6 weeks off just because your wife had a baby, because you got to be there. All the perks that are in the employment, human resources department, it's pretty hard to do that when you're self-employed. Yeah. And I see that with some of the small electrical contractors. So it's funny, one of them was an apprentice when we worked at D&D, and now he's had his own business for years, and he's still out there stringing wire, if need be. And that's kind of a difference. And it is harder because there's more requirements as far as government intervention, which does make it harder.
Yeah, especially you know when we had a small business, you had to estimate taxes and.
Oh yeah.
You know, if you got to make payroll and you don't have this, you know,
the money
ready cash, and you've already tapped in now what do you do? Well, how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you make payroll when things got tight? And things can get tight quickly. Things can go sideways quickly when you own a small business.
Very quickly, instantly. And
instantly, yeah.
It's we always would make sure that we paid the employees first, but there were months when we really didn't have any money for ourselves.
I ran a company for 3 years, and
I
didn't take. I think I took a total of $3,700, maybe $4,000 out of it in 3 years of running it. And now my employees and the other two owners were paid. We made sure they paid. We covered it. It was during 2008, right during the they called it a recession, but
hit pretty hard.
Yeah. We ran the company through 8, 9, I think it was 9, 10, 11 is when we ran it.
Okay.
And then we sold it. And we sold it for exactly what we paid for it and walked away without any debt.
You did all right.
But I did get audited, which was an experience in itself.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
And then that was as brutal an experience as you could imagine. And I happen to have a CPA that was fabulous, that is well known in Clackamas County, who went to extraordinary lengths to deal with this auditor. I don't know how the government made a dime on it, because she made that auditor work so hard. And you know what auditors are worth. And so,
a lot of money.
By the time they were done, if you balance the books on it, it was like, what a waste. And it was all because of an 80s computer glitch. Because it was a dog daycare. So in the 80s, when they built those computers that the IRS was using, the dog daycare and child daycare, there was no dog daycare. So there was child daycare. If your Visa, your credit card to cash receipts were off, then you were either fronting or something was wrong.
Target.
And that was a target. It got flagged. And that's why we got audited, was because of that. So it was ridiculous stuff. Stuff that you can't you can't alter. And once the man comes down on you, you got to deal with it. So.
Oh yeah, they're not going away. Yeah, they are not going away. No. I think it's very hard, especially now. Well, some states are worse than others. Yeah. You know, California had the Board of Equalization, where they.
I never owned a business there, thank God.
Everybody becomes equally poor, I would always say. It definitely equalizes the playing field. It
definitely does that.
But you know, you're taking taxes from your customers, and somehow you have to squirrel them away, and then make sure you have it to pay the government. And it's very cumbersome. Well, like I say, the first person we hired, I went back in the field and we hired an office manager, because there's a lot of paperwork.
There's a lot to do.
And I think it's become hostile towards small businesses, which is
I don't think
unhealthy.
You're wrong there. Yeah.
And that's really
it's weird
sad.
Because even in California, where the economy is probably the sixth in the world.
Giant. Yeah, it's like a country.
It's a huge economy.
Correct.
You know, you would think that it would be easier to work with, but it's a lot like Portland. It's a lot like Portland's a microcosm of what California is like in some degree, and it's like you've got a lot. I mean, I paid, because my business was in Portland, I had to pay for TriMet and A-frame signs and permits for this and cost for that and cost to be inspected by the fire marshal. All those things that you think about, because when I was working for fire contractors up here, the fire marshal shows up and does an inspection, and then they get these things. You got to go out and fix them. Right. That's not a free service. You pay for that.
You pay.
And and you just don't know all the hidden things that are there until you actually experience it.
And I think that's one of the hardest things for people starting business now. My son wants to start. He's in heavy equipment, has a business degree and all that. And I'm sure he could do it, but there's a lot of hidden costs that you have to research thoroughly, or you can end up with problems. And, when we had our alarm company, there was liability. I mean, we still had to buy really expensive liability insurance and all that. But it was a lot easier to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Customer, look at line 22 of your contract. You don't have a leg to stand on. And chances are they'd just go back in their hole. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not like that now. People are much more ready, willing to sue over nothing.
It's a very litigious society, isn't it?
Exactly. And, it's harder to find employees that you really trust. Mm-hmm. I know even at George Fox, they've done a very good job, but there was a period of time when we got people that just weren't worth what they were getting paid, or, and they got fired. But that costs you a lot of money if you have turnover. But one thing that we did, which was just, and I'll bring this up just as kind of interesting, this was back in the 80s. We were out in the desert, and it's extremely hot in the summer, and you're doing new construction, so you're outside drilling holes through window headers all day. And we had these women. We had 2 teams of girls, and they were in their late 20s, probably. One of them was probably mid-30s. Some were they were all moms, and they didn't have technical training, but they decided they wanted to get into the trades and get a good job. Well, we didn't care. We just didn't want somebody that'd pass out on the rafters and die on us, because it was a real problem, right? So it worked. We had these 2 teams, and they'd go out there and they'd wire these houses out there in the heat, and they loved their jobs. Well, we bought them. Probably was a little marketing issue, but, I'd been taught old school that, first impressions, lasting impressions. So you want your people to look really good. So they all had really, really nice uniforms, dark blue pants and light blue shirts. And in the winter, they had really nice jackets. And in the summer, they had shorts. Mm-hmm. So they would tell me that, well, we don't understand why the other trades will stand around at the bottom of the house and watch us climb in the rafters. I'm like, well, it was really fun. But they did a good job. And it kind of got us a little bit of a unique name for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good marketing tip.
But they were good, and they could take the heat. That was the bottom line.
They could take the heat. We should have put that on their shirts.
I mean,
we can take the heat.
That's true. No, they were great. I kind of really felt like I was probably not the most benevolent employer, because one of them radioed in, the partner had fallen through a ceiling in a dining room. She slipped off the rafters and was hanging there. And my first question was, how much damage she had done to the women's dining room table. Anyway, she was fine, but I wasn't probably the most caring employee.
Oh, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. I was so blown away. I had no idea what you guys were about.
Yeah, good.
So
well,
this is great.
This is it. Would you come back?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Nice.
We can always talk about something. There's lots of stories.
Sweet.
It's good.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. It's good to meet you.
Thanks for listening to the Half Watt Podcast. We always want to hear from you, and we encourage you to email us at halfwattpod@gmail.com with questions or even your own stories. Funny, crazy, or praiseworthy, we want to hear it all. You can follow us on Instagram at halfwattpod to stay up to date on our feed. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and share us with a friend, the best way to help us grow. The Half Watt Podcast is a production of Now Hear This Studios.